You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about sports in the state of Michigan?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that provides research and statistics about all the Detroit and Michigan sports teams, whether fans like it or not, and detects, exposes, and reveals actual and hidden facts and truth that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no coddling, no pop culture, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Head over to our website at michigansportstruth.weebly.com, follow us on Twitter, Periscope, and Instagram at Michigan_Truth, and like and share our verified Facebook page, the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast. Also listen to us on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts via iTunes, and Spotify. The Michigan Sports Truth Podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
And welcome to episode 327 of the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast in audio form on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts via iTunes, and Spotify. Yes, we have an Instagram at Michigan_Truth, same as our Periscope and our Twitter. Now let's get down to business here. I'm Taylor Phillips along with Buck Gino and Ed Smith. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Follow Buck Gino on Twitter at BuckGino3, 3 I's for Roman numerals, and follow Ed Smith at EdSmith313. You can follow me on Instagram with the same handles. So, let's get down to it.
Touchdown, Michigan!
Last week, we heard that Ohio State Buckeyes football head coach Urban Meyer was being placed on paid administrative leave amid the domestic violence allegations. That was a day after, like a day or two after we concluded episode 326 last week, and now we're getting word that Ohio State announces the investigation with head coach Urban Meyer will be completed within 14 days.
Oh, man!
Oh, my.
So, Ed Smith, we'll start with you. You've got some analysis on the Urban Meyer incident and how he denies that he was aware of the allegations. So go ahead.
Well, yes. Well, first and foremost, this really shouldn't surprise anyone that had any type of doubts or any conjecture of Urban Meyer as someone with a shady past or a shady background of doing some really shady stuff. If you consider going back to not just to around the time when Ezekiel Elliott was still at Ohio State and faced his allegations as we can see followed him all the way to the NFL. But even beyond that, even going back to his days in Florida, not just with the issues with whether it be Cam Newton stealing a laptop or the alleged actions of Aaron Hernandez committing a walkout drive-by shooting there, all that transpiring under Urban Meyer's watch, by the way, as well as the numerous incidents regarding Percy Harvin. But there's also this instance of not just that, but also Zach Smith, because as we know, Zach Smith he is the grandson of Earl Bruce, legendary Earl Bruce, who was not only a head coach at Ohio State, but also one of essentially, if not the mentor to Urban Meyer in his introduction to coaching in the coaching gene period. So there's a lot of history that goes back between Urban Meyer and his family and Earl Bruce and his family. So it doesn't surprise me to see in what many would view as the two parties working together to try to cover their own name. Now, what is essential and important to know here is that Urban Meyer was not only aware of what went down in 2015, he was also aware of incidents and allegations regarding 2009. So there was stuff going back all the way to 2009. So it would be very difficult to believe that Urban Meyer did have some type of knowledge of the pattern of behavior that Smith was going on or Smith was transpiring in all these years. whether it be now or 2015 or 2009, especially back in 2009. So the comments that he made at Big Ten Media Day, where he essentially denied having any knowledge of what went down in 2015, that was proven to be a lie itself by the very statement that he released just a couple days ago, which also coincidentally was released at the same time that Zach Smith gave his exclusive interview to ESPN Sports Center. And for those who have not watched the interview, I'll sum it up for you. It was Smith essentially sticking up for Urban, trying to protect his own backside. Which, by the way, was when you hear some of the defense, that excuse rather that he had as a reason to explain his actions, why he abused his wife, why he choked and strangled his wife. He even had the nerve to borrow a phrase from Ndamukong Suh by saying he was removing himself from the situation. Yeah, those photos and those text messages show a completely different story of you trying to remove yourself from the situation, Mr. Smith. Okay, so that's an excuse that I don't buy, and I don't think anyone else would buy either as a reason to defend his actions. And in the same breath of that interview, not only did he defend Urban Meyer, the guy who fired him, right? He also had the nerve to actually throw his athletic director, Gene Smith, under the bus, saying that Gene Smith knew about this and he didn't do it, or along the lines of, again, just trying to besmirch Gene Smith's name in order to protect Urban Meyer. Now, if you're a Buckeye fan or a hardcore Buckeye fan, you might find this as karma of sorts for Gene Smith, because this was essentially the same thing that he did to Jim Tressel right when the tattoo controversy exploded, which resulted in Tressel resigning or was fired, depending on whose side of the story you believe. We'll see this as karma coming to live for Gene Smith. Nonetheless, regardless of that, it's a horrible situation all around, not just for Ohio State, not just for Urban Meyer, not just for those that suffer and go through domestic abuse in all ways, shapes, and forms. See this incident play itself out, a tale that's all too familiar of, whether it be the battered victim, going back to the same relationship. It's an unfortunate pattern, but seeing how it all transpired, and how where it would be impossible if you take Urban Meyer and his wife, did not have any type of knowledge to where they could have led an influential direction to the proper action being done, which was Zach Smith obviously being fired way before now, which was just in late July last month, as opposed to what happened in 2015, and then leading the authorities to do the proper work after that. Because remember, the police was called a number of 9 times between then and now to investigate what was going on between Smith and his wife. So again, everything just smells fishy, and it just comes off as if there's a massive cover up going on, whether it be Meyer, his wife, Smith, or multiple parties involved at Ohio State itself. Which is, quite ironic, because the school already is going through a scandal in and of itself, dealing with issues regarding Jim Jordan. Now you add this mess on top of everything, and it just, oh my goodness, it almost takes away heat and distraction from what's going on for Michigan State. Now, we're going to get into this shortly in terms of how it affects the rest of the Big Ten, but I'll just say this, from the perspective of Michigan State, I hate to sound, morbid about this, but in a way, it does take some shine off of your distraction, off your own plate of wrongdoings that's been going on in your name this past off season. Not just the Larry Nassar issue, or even stuff that's known about information regarding past players like Mark D'Antonio, and for that matter, Tom Izzo, but also what happened recently, as in Mark D'Antonio thinking it was necessary and appropriate to reinstate John Reschke back to the team after his clearly proven disgustingly racist postings that was found and placed online and so forth. So for D'Antonio to try to use the excuse of, this is a lesson of teaching forgiveness, is total BS, and everyone can see right through that. But yet, instead of trying to focus on this, and also what ESPN failed initially to do massively, and when this issue of Urban Meyer broke, waiting almost past 4 hours to even report an update of this on their main website, instead choosing not to focus on what's going on at Ohio State or what just happened in Michigan State, but instead feel the need to ran constant coverage of Jim Harbaugh mocking him about because he said some quote about chicken being a nervous bird. So that's the type of issue in terms of journalistic integrity that was a severe major lacking of that we saw transpiring last week, and just a lack of accountability all around that made this situation, which is already nasty and disgusting as it was, even more sad and pathetic.
Yeah, not to mention the D'Antonio and Izzo stuff with the Larry Nassar stuff, and all the other sexual assault allegations regarding the football players Cory Corley, King, and Vance, etc. And it also reminds us of the Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky stuff. And the Big Ten is just absolutely troublesome and mischievous.
Michigan's not all the way clean too. Okay, remember what happened in 2013 and 2014 regarding the Brandon Gibbons issue and how that was being swept under the rug. And had not been for Jeff Moss and his reporting of the Detroit Sports Rag, none of us would have known about that. So again, it's everyone's dirty. It's not a surprise. What a surprise is that so many people are now catching on to this.
Mm-hmm. Buck, what's your say?
I'm not going to really go that deep into it, simply because I can only say this. Urban Meyer at Florida was a snake. He left Florida in a shambles as far as it being a broken program with the discipline issues, with multiple players given second chances, and really just kind of having a Wild West style of leadership and discipline. And there are multiple sources within the University of Florida that when they brought Will Muschamp on board, he was asked not only to improve the football portions of the University of Florida, but he was also asked to clean up the program. Urban Meyer saying he had headaches, Urban Meyer saying he had health problems. Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't lying, per se, but he left in a lot in part due to the fact that program was irretrievably lost under his leadership. Took a year off. Ohio State gave him the job because they had to get rid of Jim Tressel for unrelated when you're talking about what happened with Jim Tressel as compared to what's happening now. There wasn't really a sexual assault case. That was more of the Terrell Pryor tattoo scandal and getting trading memorabilia for money and doing other things. But Jim Tressel had to be fired. And Urban Meyer was brought in. And a lot of people that I know that are Ohio State fans were very shocked simply because of the fact that Urban Meyer had the exact same, if not worse, reputation at Florida. When he came to Ohio State, he said he was changed. He said that he had turned a new leaf. He was tough on suspensions. He multiple times he suspended players for what would be considered, I would say, inadequate evidence. If people remember, Carlos Hyde was suspended 4 games when he was accused of striking a woman in a nightclub, and then they obtained video that ascertained that Hyde didn't hit her, and then he got off suspension. So people thought Urban Meyer had changed his stripes, but I'll say this with a grain of salt because we don't know exactly what happened. We're getting 3 different stories from 3 different sources. One, the ex-wife of Zach Smith himself, and Urban Meyer. But all signs point to Urban Meyer at least having some sort of knowledge. He'd have to be under a rock to not know that Zach Smith and his now ex-wife Courtney were having some marital difficulty, and a lot of the difficulty centered around Zach Smith being an abuser. His wife got text messages, and other wives on the coaching staff got text messages. Steve Adazio, who is currently the head coach at Boston College, has come out and said that he knew of the incidents back when Zach Smith was a grad assistant at Florida. And nothing was done at that time. And when Urban took his show on the road up north to Ohio, Zach Smith continued his behavior, and Urban Meyer didn't do anything about it. Now, you can sit there and say that there were no charges brought, and that's correct. You can sit there and say that Urban Meyer did the proper thing when he said that he forwarded on to university officials. You can say all these things. I don't know if Urban Meyer should be fired, but I can tell you this. He hasn't changed one bit since he left Florida. The only thing that's changed is the color windbreaker that he wears. And once a snake, always a snake. Urban Meyer got caught. To what degree of his wrongdoing, we don't know yet. But you can guarantee that if this is something that reporters can find, other things are going to be found. Whether they involve Zach Smith, whether they involve other players or former players, these are things that are going to come out. Because when it comes time for these types of investigations, people start to talk. Because they've been freed from that shackle of silence when somebody says something or if somebody finds out something like Brett McMurphy did. Other people are going to talk. There's this investigation in 14 days, which doesn't surprise me. I don't think that anything will happen. Maybe a game suspension for Urban Meyer at the beginning of the season when they play Oregon State, where you, Ed, and I, Taylor, could coach that team to victory against Oregon State because they stink. So it'll be for appearances, and then he'll come back to coaching, especially since his second game is against Rutgers and his former protege, Chris Ash. A nice little story to dovetail back into his return to coaching. And to tell me that you're going to figure out everything that happened in 14 days is laughable. But they're telling us it's going to happen in 14 days. So my gut is that they're going to find out that Urban Meyer did the bare minimum. He told somebody at the university that this is going on, that hit somebody's desk, he got washed under. There'll be a scapegoat. They'll find out whose desk that hit and say, hey, why didn't you say anything to Gene Smith? You know, it sounds like Gene Smith knew. They'll sacrifice somebody, some low-level staffer in the athletic department, and then 3 months later, people in at least Columbus will forget this has ever happened. Like I said, Meyer was a snake at Florida, and even though people thought that he wasn't the same at Ohio State, discipline issues still, and other college football programs don't have discipline issues, but they do. But the problem is that Urban Meyer has had the history before, and when he was brought to Ohio State, he was brought to clean up the program. Well, he did that with the players. He hasn't done that at all with his own house and his own coaching staff. And I've had a lot of people be very angry with me because they say that not all the facts are in and we can't do anything. Okay, I don't know what facts other than what's already been presented that you need to tell me that Urban Meyer at least knew. And for him to throw Gene Smith and the university under the bus for that statement that says, well, I told them, they just chose to do nothing with it. Now, the stage is set. In 14 days, we're gonna learn either A, that the university, the Ohio State University, grows a pair and fires him because he's not going to demean and impugn the university for his own benefit. Or B, they're going to enjoy making money winning football games, and they'll find somebody else to lay blame on or rule it that it was inconclusive or some other euphemism for we don't want to fire him because we like making a lot of money and selling a lot of shirts and whatnot. So that's where we're going to be at with this situation. I'm not going to get all deep into all the other things happening around like Ed Smith did because point blank, it just means more time spent talking about something that isn't going to be fixed. Michigan State did it. Penn State did it. Michigan's had it happen. These are things that happen in college campuses within athletic programs far too much. And until one university lowers the boom, much like Baylor did, and basically says, "Hey, we don't care that we like to, we messed up. We're going to basically gut the program and be bad for a long time." Unless more programs start to do this type of behavior is still going to be pervading in I would say, the society or the community of college athletics. And I don't think that anything will change after this. And maybe it's because I'm cynical, or maybe it's because I think that I've seen enough patterns to know where this is going. You can't possibly tell me this investigation is going to take 14 days and you're going to have all your answers. Michigan State still has an investigation going on. Still. And they still haven't figured everything out. Ohio State's going to do this in 14 days. Yeah, they're taking 2 weeks to figure out if they want to make a stand or if they like making money. And my guess is going to be that they like making money.
Right. It's all about the money, as Vince McMahon would say, from the WWE. So we're going to do 3 segments along the way, all 3 of them. We're going full metal jacket on this one. So why don't we start off with the 5 questions segment.
It's time for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1. If Urban Meyer is punished, how should that be?
I would say, at the very least, some form of suspension. If he's not outright fired, which is would be my first choice above all else, but if he was not fired, I think a suspension of at least the first 4 games or a similar length would suffice to that degree. Because if Jim Tressel let's be honest, if Jim Tressel lost his job over some tattoos, Urban Meyer should lose his job over an issue way more serious, way more deadly, and way more just dreadful compared to what Jim Tressel had to go through. So, if you ask me, first choice, he should be fired. But if he's not fired, I would take any form of suspension.
Buck?
How should he be punished?
Yeah.
Well, I can't determine that yet because we don't have everything in front of us.
Right.
And I don't like making decisions until I have everything that I possibly can. That said, I'm going to stick with my original prediction. He'll get suspended for 1 game. And after that, like I said, in 90 days, nobody in Columbus will remember that he potentially abetted a physically abusive husband who happened to be his assistant coach. And they'll be more happy about whatever bowl bid they got. Or maybe they'll be disappointed. But either way, this is something that I feel like will get swept under the rug at Ohio State. And how they choose to punish Urban Meyer is going to tell me what they decide about how they want to run that football program. Because if they think Urban Meyer is going to be suspended for a game, and this is something that they can't conclude that he was actually wrong, basically they're saying, hey, as long as you do the bare minimum, just like Joe Paterno did the bare minimum, it's okay. Penn State didn't want to fire Joe Paterno. They had to because of the pressure they were receiving from virtually 99% of the people that had opinions on the subject. I don't think Urban Meyer, in this case, has that much going against him, but right now it does not look good for him. And the way they should punish him is up for debate. What I think is going to happen is the 1 game, and then they're going to go on with their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, that's it's like I said earlier. The investigation will be done within 14 days, so we'll have to keep tabs on it. We'll have to get the full lowdown on it and see whether he is punished or not, and if he's punished, then how he will be. Question number will be answered in reality in due time. That said,
Next question.
Question number 2. If Meyer is suspended for the entire season, let's say the game, for example, do the Michigan Wolverines have a better chance to beat the Ohio State Buckeyes on the road at the Horseshoe for the first time since 2000? Ed, we'll start with you again.
You can easily draw parallels between this and the 2011 season when Jim Tressel was shown the door, and the Buckeyes under Luke Fickell, they went 6-6 or 5-7, and it culminated with a loss to Michigan at the end of the season. However, that one was on the road in Ann Arbor. This one would be in Columbus. So even if, let's say, for instance, Meyer is gone, whether he's suspended for the season or he's fired or whatever, and you have to go with the new coach or whatever, the game is still going to be in Columbus. So I'm not going to be as confident as saying Michigan for sure is going to go there and win, especially when we're not sure if their quarterback issues are fixed yet, let alone an improved offensive line and more proper efficiency from the running game to take the pressure out their defense. So they can prove that, especially doing that on the road more consistently. Yeah, I'll be more willing to believe that. But as of this moment, no. I don't think that would be the issue, whether Urban Meyer was there or not.
Buckeye, I would have to assume that you agree with Ed on this one.
To a point, I think that when you look at the 2011 case with Ohio State, that was not a team that was very strong. They were racked by not only discipline issues, but they also had some key players leave. And that Ohio State team, whether it had been coached by Luke Fickell or somebody else, they would have struggled. Now, I don't think they would have struggled to 6-7 as they did, but they would have had a tough go that year. And it was really a confluence of events that brought Urban Meyer to Ohio State. It was Jim Tressel getting fired, but it was also Luke Fickell leading them to a sub-500 record, that they realized that this may not be the time to really promote from within and to keep staying the course. I don't think that if Urban Meyer was fired, that Ryan Day is going to lead them to an undefeated season. But I still think that they'd be a very good football team. And issues notwithstanding, Michigan has not proven yet, and Jim Harbaugh is now fourth year, that they can beat anybody on the road, especially a rival. I mean, they beat Michigan State on the road, but that was really a bad Michigan State team. And they didn't do it convincingly. So to go on the road and beat Ohio State at Ohio State, Urban Meyer or no Urban Meyer, it's going to be a tall task for Michigan. And if Urban Meyer is fired, I see them having a better chance. But it's not something they're starting out with a great chance to begin with. Now, again, we're in August. That game is in November. A lot of things can change from now to then. But if it were to happen today, I just don't see that Ohio State would lose that game, even if Urban Meyer wasn't coaching.
Right. Yeah, it also have to consider Michigan's playing in a hostile environment, one of the most hostile environments in college football. The Horseshoe, the Snake Pit, as Frank Beckman would put it, Ohio Stadium. So, I still, and the Buckeyes still have a hell of a football program, better than Michigan, whichever coach they have. Even if it's not Tressel and even if it's not Meyer, consider that factor too. So,
next question.
Question number 3: will Meyer be in any legal trouble?
Well, if they find that he violated any Title IX protocol. And if he did that, if he is fired because of that, I think that stops right there. I don't think that anybody's really going to try to do anything with him after he gets fired from his job. If he stays on, it's going to be difficult to pin any legal ramifications on him, because what are you going to sue him for? What is he going to have done that would be considered criminal? Is it something that he willingly ignored? Maybe. But you can't be arrested for that. The civil suit's probably not going to happen unless the ex-wife of Zach Smith decides to do something, which I just don't see that happening. It would be really hard for them to find some sort of legal standing to bring charges against Urban Meyer at this point. Again, that can change, but right now it would be very tough to find something that he was necessarily guilty of, unless, again, he violated Title IX protocol. And then at that point, the university probably would terminate him, and I just really don't think that there would be much happening after that.
Ed, to you?
I'm sorry, repeat the question one more time. I'm sorry.
Yep. Will Meyer be in any legal trouble?
In terms of legal trouble, I have to agree with Buck. Anything past the Title IX violations, that's all I could see potentially happening. He didn't necessarily commit a crime per se. If there's anything that he's guilty of, he's guilty from a morality standpoint. I think it's the same boat of what happened with Joe Paterno. He didn't commit a crime of any sort by not going forward or not doing enough or failing to report properly the issue was going on with his coaches. So I think it's just the same thing happening here for what Urban Meyer was doing. I don't see that as being substantial enough to bring any type of criminal charges of whether it be some type of obstruction or aiding and abetting or any of that nature. And if there was some type of civil suit brought as a result, I don't see that suit having any type of legs to maintain enough strength to carry on for a long period of time before reaching any type of respectful settlement. So outside of the small Title IX infraction, I don't see really anything else happening to Urban from a legal standpoint.
If people want to draw the parallels between the Penn State and the Ohio State situations, vastly different. Number one, you're talking minors. You're talking about things happening on your campus when you're talking about Penn State. There's just a boatload of things that happened at Penn State that allowed criminal charges to come. Zach Smith himself might face things down the road, but these things did not happen on Ohio State's campus that we know of. And these are involving adults. So when you're trying to compare these situations, you're really going back to the Title IX part. And there's far more things going on that went on at Penn State that warranted criminal action or criminal prosecution because of who's involved and where it happened versus this. And so legal action is going to be very difficult to pursue with this.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to pause the 5-question segment and go to this segment here.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant
guilty or not guilty.
Guilty or not guilty, Urban Meyer. Ed, we'll start with you.
It's a simple vote for me when you consider his history, not just regarding this instance, but also past incidents, not just at Ohio State, but going back to the states of Florida. It's clear and obvious Urban Meyer is guilty.
Buck, you would have to agree. There's the same answer, right?
I do, but there's some caveats to it. I want to believe Urban Meyer did something to prevent this. I want to believe that he at least upheld what he is telling his players to do, what he's telling his coaches to do. That said, once this is all sorted out, I have a hard time believing that maybe in the court of law or I don't want to say the court of the school, because, I mean, obviously this is an internal thing. I want to say that he's guilty, but it's really going to be remain to be seen. And I think that the decision of the school is going to determine his guilt as an employee of the university. But in the court of public opinion, he's already been made guilty, and there would have to be overwhelming evidence that shows that he actually did try to prevent this and did follow the correct procedures for him to not be guilty in the court of public opinion. So my vote for this is guilty, with the caveat that nothing else is found to the contrary of what we already know.
Yep, my answer is guilty as well. Yep, it's all pretty cut and dry, written everything. So we're gonna that is the complete analogy of the Urban Meyer situation. So we're going to transition to NBA basketball.
Left sideline, three, and he answers.
Utah Jazz player, I think, is a shooting guard, but he's Donovan Mitchell anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Donovan Mitchell, a player whom the Pistons passed up for Luke Kennard. Donovan Mitchell was calling out President Donald Trump yesterday on Twitter at Real Donald Trump. Mitchell's Twitter handle is Spidad Mitchell, Spidad Mitchell, with two L's typically. Donald Trump tweeted, LeBron James was just interviewed by the dumbest man on television, Don Lemon. He made LeBron look smart, which isn't easy to do. I like Mike. And Mitchell quoted that tweet and said, a sign of an insecure human being is one who attacks others to make themselves feel better. I'm just sad that young kids have to see stupid tweets like these and grow up thinking it's okay. Forget everything else, Donald. You're setting a bad example for kids. Disgusted emoji. Our future clown emoji. And Mitchell brought his A game. He's completely right. He labeled Donald Trump a clown with that clown emoji, putting the cherry on top of the sundae. That's just pure, true, and with 100% pride. And Mitchell's a class act, unlike Donald Trump, who has no class whatsoever, not only as a president, but as a human being as well. Ed, we'll start with you on this analogy.
Yeah. What else there is that needs to be said about what the president said, stating his thoughts on LeBron James? I think, first and foremost, the temerity of the president to release this statement the week of LeBron doing what really more so for public education was more for public education than what his supposed Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has ever done, which was really looking out for at-risk youth in his community of Akron, Ohio, and around that area by opening up a fully funded, well-orchestrated, well-put-together, whole-ass school for at-risk youth that's going to give them free tuition, free uniforms, free textbooks, all the materials that they need, but then to not only get good grades, but also, as long as they keep up their end of the bargain, get a full-on, full-ride free tuition at the University of Akron through a program, again, which is what had LeBron's fingerprints all over it. So, again, for the president to classify that as dumb or stupid or insult LeBron's intelligence is just not only insane of any sort of rhetoric, but also as another example of his true colors showing out. Because if you notice the past trend of what the president has done, since he's taken office, is not just always the constant criticizing of black athletes or entertainers who have spoken out negatively against him in one way, shape, or form, whether it be LeBron James or Stephen Curry or Colin Kaepernick, for instance. But yet, however, when their white counterparts do it, i.e. Steve Kerr or Greg Popovich or even our own Stan Van Gundy, not only just talking negatively about him, but also his followers and his voters, we get crickets. We get no response of that nature. So again, that's just another indicator of Donald Trump's true colors and what he really is as a person, which is not a surprise to say the least. For them to even try to trollishly inject the debate, his opinion of the Jordan versus LeBron debate, was so silly and stupid that I think that, above all else, was the reason that prompted Michael Jordan's weak, soft response, which was, "I support LJ. He does great for all he can for his community." Michael Jordan had, I appreciate the sentiment of, you're not against LeBron in this instance, but also you're all the same guy that said Republicans buy sneakers too. So don't forget, trust me, Mike, the black community does not forget about how you ride the fence sometimes. But for LeBron, this is something that should be a little to no issue for him. As you can see, how he responded on Twitter, not even mentioning the president by name or even referring to this incident, tweeting about something else entirely, which is smart because, again, that's just feeding into what he wants and what his base wants. But I just find it funny and ironic that the president will not respond to Eminem verbally destroying him in a 4-minute battle rap on national TV, yet he has quite the convenience to go on a late-night tweeting binge because an NBA player on CNN says that he uses sports to divide the country. So it's not only laughable and not only stupid, but, again, another example of what his true colors are as a human being really showcased itself here. But more than that entirely, it was just used as another dig deep into the well to distract the public from what's going on regarding his administration and the involving and ensuing investigations that seem to be closing the walls in on him. So again, it's another sad, pathetic distraction attempt that hopefully the public should be adhere and adverse to by now as to not buy. But still, LeBron James has far better things to do and worry about than the opinions of what some clown may think of him on Twitter. And yes, you heard me. Donald Trump is a clown. And Donovan Mitchell had the accurate tweet to sum up what he's doing in terms of an impression upon the youth of this country and the future of this country, the future generation of this country, but also with that emoji at the very end of this tweet too. So bravo to Donovan Mitchell for standing up, for sticking with LeBron, because again, from what I could tell from the NBA and all of its players at the very least, there is a sense of camaraderie, that brotherhood of, an attack on one is an attack on all of us. So it's nice to see LeBron get that support from his fellow constituents. You would hope to have seen a better response from, say, of Michael Jordan and Adam Silver, but still a response is a response. It shows solidarity and support for him and his cause and what he's about as a person. And, if you think LeBron James, for those that may get mad or what he said about Trump, let's take into consideration of comparison between who LeBron James is versus what Donald Trump is. Which of these two men have treated their wife fairly? Which of these two men have treated their families and their kids fairly? Which of these two men has been such a beacon of positivity to their community, not just giving back, but also being a proper role model for people to look up to? That's all you need to know right then and there, okay? LeBron James built a school to help out children, whereas Donald Trump puts children in cages. That's all I got to say about that.
Man, that is disturbing. Buck, you've got to agree.
There's not really much I can say that would enhance what Ed's already said, so I'm just going to say this. I think that as this continues, because we know it's going to, you're going to have to see that that brotherhood or that camaraderie really come through. And instead of dividing and setting against each other, teams, players, organizations, owners, fans, whoever is on the side of who is right, which in this case obviously is LeBron James. You're going to have to continue to do that, because if you want to defeat people that are trying to bring you down, they're trying to impugn your character, they're trying to, for lack of a better word, rain on your parade. You're going to have to be strong. You're going to have to make measured yet powerful statements, and it's going to have to continue. So LeBron James didn't really respond to it because he didn't think he had to, but he didn't because he had everybody else doing it for him. I think that Michael Jordan's statement was an embarrassment simply because even though he's a businessman, I think he has a greater responsibility to not only black people, but he has a responsibility as a worldwide icon to respond a little bit more strongly than I support LeBron James. That said, the fact remains that people are going to have to band together, and in the face of division and divisiveness, combat that with a sense of brotherhood and community. It doesn't have to be just brotherhood; it can be community. And I just don't know what else to say other than continue to oppose those that would try to destroy what you've built.
All right. So let's narrow it down to question number 4.
Next question.
Question number 4. How would the Pistons feel if they had Donovan Mitchell because of his beef against President Donald Trump instead of Luke Kennard? Think about that.
Well, it depends on how they might have feel personally, internally. It comes down to whether or not they voted for the guy, in my view. But in terms of publicly how it would look, I think they would be smart. They would have done a similar situation to what the Lakers have done. Jeannie Buss, the controlling owner, CEO, she released a statement that raved about LeBron, his efforts to the community and who he is as a person. Full unbridled support and solidarity for LeBron. I think we would have seen a similar type of reaction from the Pistons front office if, say, for instance, Donovan was the one under attack by the president, or someone who spoke rhetoric similar to the president and it reached a wide audience. This is just merely responding to the issue. But I think if you were to ask someone, the smart response would be saying that would be along the lines of supporting his right to free speech, his First Amendment rights that we all, in this country and this nation, share and should have, but also embracing the fact that this is a league of a diverse community all around, from all shapes and all walks of life, and this type of rhetoric should be embraced, not derided or be feared in any sense of imagination. So. If you're asking what the Pistons would have done, that would have been the smart and proper thing to do if this was on their watch. I mean, you saw what Stan Van Gundy did, so you have to imagine that multiple people within that locker room shared those similar feelings and thoughts as well.
Buck?
I think that if Donovan Mitchell had been drafted by the Pistons, I think that this would have been a larger issue. Simply because of the fact that at the time, Stan Van Gundy would have been the coach. He's not anymore, but now instead they'll be headed up by Dwayne Casey, who indeed is black. I think that the response would have been much more forceful, not only because the Pistons themselves, as an organization, would want to stand with their player in the face of criticism or with somebody that is defending one of the premier citizens of the league. But I think it would have been much more forceful, especially if Steve Van Gundy somehow had been retained, which Donovan Mitchell would have been drafted. Maybe he'd still be the coach. I think that the Pistons themselves, as a franchise, Tom Gores doesn't strike me as the type of guy that probably would have come out and said a whole lot. And we can draw the dot, we can connect the dots there. But I think that overall, it would have been much more of an overwhelming support for him from the organization. Not to say that Donovan Mitchell doesn't have any allies or any backers in this, but they for sure, especially if Steve Van Gundy had been retained, would have made a forceful statement that would have been in support of their player, lashing back out against hurtful rhetoric. So the Pistons themselves, I think that had the shoe been on the other foot, he wouldn't have been with the Utah Jazz. He in fact would have been the Detroit Piston. I think this would have been a much more powerful exchange than what has happened already.
Yeah, absolutely. Dwayne Casey is their head coach. And don't get me wrong, he's a developing coach like he was with the Toronto Raptors. He can prove it with the Pistons here, but this is a more social issue, a more serious issue than that, as it's more serious than sports, than just sports. But honestly, with the issues with President Donald Trump, yeah, in terms of the sports world, yeah, it's going to keep going on and on and on everywhere in the sports world, and it's going to continue until Trump is no longer president. It's a crazy and festering population on this earth.
You can argue it will continue long after he's out of office because some will view him as a martyr of sorts.
Yeah, definitely. So only one team left to cover, and that is the Tigers.
That one is long gone.
They sweep the Reds in an easy 2-game series at home, and then they have Thursday off. And then they get swept by the Oakland Athletics in a 3-game series on the West Coast, in which they've scored only one run the entire series.
You are pathetic!
And speaking of the Oakland Athletics, the Tigers failed to trade starting pitcher Mike Fiers to the Oakland Athletics because they didn't have a deal in place for him.
Yeah, there were reports that they had one, and then it fell apart. I don't know how far along they got in the negotiation, because there were plenty of people, at least I shouldn't say plenty of people, there was plenty of evidence that they didn't really have a cemented deal. I think that maybe the Tigers thought they had something. The A's were probably the ones that were holding back. And whether the price was too high or the A's felt that they didn't need to do that type of move, because it's not like they didn't make moves. I mean, they made moves around the trading deadline. Regardless of what the situation was, the deal didn't get done. And the Tigers are bad. We knew that coming in. That's not a surprise to people.
Of course.
The scoring the one run in a 3-game series, which they faced no pitchers that you would say were dominant. That's a bad stretch, but you're talking about the Tigers here, where they're obviously in a rebuild. I'm not saying they had to give Mike Fiers away, because you certainly don't want to do that. He is still under team control for next year.
Right.
So the fact remains that he could be a piece of the puzzle for next year, because you have to remember, under a rebuild, it's great to get prospects. It's great to get guys that you think are going to be good, but you still have to field a major league team. And I'm kind of in the minority of the opinion that not dealing Mike Fiers isn't exactly the end of the world. He's a serviceable starter. The vast majority of the rotation that they have even projected for next year is not good. And so you're looking at a guy that can at least get you some quality innings. And next trade deadline. If Mike Fiers makes it through waivers, which I think would be highly unlikely, but still the possibility remains. I don't think it's the end of the world that he didn't change teams, because the guys that they have in the system right now aren't going to be ready for at least a couple of years. 2020 is what was projected for a lot of the guys, if not later, that they have in their system that are pegged as the next generation, if you want to use that terminology. Matt Manning, Franklin Perez, who's been dealing with some injury problems, Kyle Funkhauser, Bo Burrows, who's been pretty spotty the last couple of months. These are not major league ready prospects. So next year, yeah, they could have found another pitcher on a cheap deal, perhaps, just like they did with Mike Fiers. The problem is that if you look at the free agent pitching that they have next year that will be available, as of today, that's not to say that teams won't re-sign some of those guys. It's pretty poor. And so they might have been able to find a diamond in the rough for a couple of years, but the guys that they'll be getting are fringe guys that you're hoping are able to break through. I think that Al Avila as a scout still has some ability, and he can identify young players that have potential. And maybe they would have got lucky with somebody. But again, you're basically trading Mike Fiers for a couple of lottery tickets, and I just don't know if the price that they were asking was too high, or if Oakland felt that Mike Fiers wasn't going to be the person that they could add to the rotation that would push them over the edge. But just because this deal fell apart doesn't mean Al Avila is a terrible general manager.
Oh.
You look at last year, people jumped all over him from the trades that he did make. And so now he doesn't make one with a guy that is arguably, at this point, maybe their second best pitcher and the staff. And now people are excoriating for that. You can't win. You can't make everybody happy. I mean, that's the job of a general manager, is somebody's going to be mad about the decision you did or didn't make. And this is not a team that needs to be pushing forward and trying to accelerate the process, because it's not going to happen. They're not going to trade Mike Fiers and be really good next year. And so why not get a guy that you have some control over, whether he goes to arbitration or they find another one-year deal to go to free agency. Not a bad gamble. And unless he goes completely off the deep end, he's probably going to be the same pitcher he was this year. And maybe you can get something a little bit more for him next year, because you never know who's going to get hurt. You never know who's going to be in the race or who's going to decide that they need to buy to try to keep themselves in contention. I just don't think the A's had a lot that Detroit was looking for, and the guys that they were looking for in return for Mike Fiers, maybe not something that the Oakland A's wanted to give up for what was going to amount to a fourth or fifth starter, a long guy out of the bullpen when the playoffs start. He wasn't going to be part of their playoff rotation. And that's you're not going to pay a steep price to get a guy in there that is basically insurance in today's market. And with the free agent pitching being as poor and as shallow the pool as it is next year, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing for the Tigers. And let them play the rest of the year out. And again, next year they're probably going to be just a little bit better. They'll probably still be pretty bad. And maybe you can trade Mike Fiers next year when he's going into free agency, because you don't think he's going to be part of your long-term solution, because he's obviously not. And at that point, if you get something for him, great. I don't think that them trading him next year is going to be something that they're going to miss out on some great deal that the A's at the last minute decided not to pull through.
Right. Ed?
Yeah, I see from my point of view of what comes down to, let's be clear, trading Mike Fiers is not going to be the end-all, be-all to take the Tigers from ragdoll of the AL Central to perennial playoff contender overnight. Let's get that first and foremost out the way.
Right.
Secondly, it's not. I will say it's not as much of a foobar as it was for the Cleveland Browns incident this past season of waiting until after the actual trade deadline passing before trying to submit their offer for approval. So thankfully it didn't reach that level of low count 'em, but still, it was uneventful because I think what Buck brings up is a very strong point of, yeah, you might not have wanted to get what you wanted, but it's still something you can control over for at least the rest of this year and next year. And at least you still got a couple of other deals done so that you didn't walk away from this as completely empty. Everyone knows you're rebuilding. Everyone knows that you're just trying to start over and redo a makeover of your team. So this is something that's going to take time. It's not going to be completed in one fell swoop. You're going to need some proper draft picks. You may need multiple seasons and multiple trade deadlines to properly set and adjust and completely fill out your roster the way you want it to be before you're probably set to go out and contend again for the playoffs and more. So, but the Tigers, for them, it was a step in the right direction to get some deals done. They're nowhere near that spot to where they can pull off a blockbuster deal. They're far removed from those days. So it's just a matter of building to the future. See what you can make out of in terms of your future faces of the franchise, leading you in the right direction. And then just when the time is right, you have the right chips in place. Maybe then you'll be able to pull off a much better, bigger, blockbuster caliber type of deal than what you're currently sitting at right now.
Right.
Yeah, people are acting like the Tigers missed some golden opportunity. I mean, they're not going to be very good next year either. There might be, like I said, there might be a little bit better, but they're still not going to be that good. And when you're talking about a rebuild, I was reading an article this afternoon about Nick Colletti with the Dodgers. The man has traded 71 prospects, and there's only one that they really wish they wouldn't have pulled the trigger on. It has turned into a bona fide Major League Baseball player that can be counted on as a top player. You're not getting the team's best, especially for a guy like Mike Fiers. You're getting guys that they're organizational fodder. You're getting guys that they're, maybe they have too many shortstops, or maybe they have too many second basemen, or whatever the case may be. You're getting their surplus for a guy like Mike Fiers. And not to say that that's not what they're going to get next year either, but I just get the sense that Al Avila probably tried to stretch out the price tag, and the A's balked, and that's fine. Maybe Al Avila was trying to get something more than he really should have for Mike Fiers, and the A's just didn't feel it. That's okay. That's not a bad thing. And people are acting like Al Avila missed some great opportunity. I mean, I don't like all of the moves he's done. You're not going to like all the moves a general manager does, regardless. But I think that trading Mike Fiers away for what it was going to amount to a bag of hammers isn't really moving the rebuild in the right direction. You look at what they have in the farm system now. There's only 25 spots on a major league roster. 40-man roster is your extended roster that when you see in September. But, I mean, you're 25-man. There's only 25 spots. And are you going to get a guy who, at this point, is a part of your major league roster? Are you getting somebody in return that's going to be better than that? And I just don't think that the A's had the willingness to give up what the Tigers were hoping to get, and they moved away from the table. The Tigers did make a trade intra-divisionally, oddly enough, with the Indians. And people were talking about that trade, in much higher regard than what they think that Mike Fiers would have netted. I mean, they traded Leonys Martin, who was a reclamation project, and got something for him. Yet people are pissed because Mike Fiers didn't move teams. Well, you can't have it both ways. You either think that Al Avila did a good job of the trade deadline for getting something out of what was basically nothing, or B, you think he failed because he didn't do enough. And that's going to be the bottom line. And I just don't really see the consternation from all these people that think that Mike Fiers should have been traded. When if you look at the trades that were made around baseball, there weren't guys just slinging prospects around. I mean, this was very calculated. Unless you're the Milwaukee Brewers, teams just weren't dealing out a lot of players. And so it just kind of floors me that at this point of a rebuild, which is in its infant stages, people want all these trades to happen because they're not going to be any good. And I get it. I mean, they're not going to be good, so get what you can. But this is going to be a process. They're not going to be very good next year. 2020 is when all the young kids are supposed to be coming up into the system, from the system, and getting some major league time. 2021 is probably, you're talking about 3 more seasons before you're really discussing if the Tigers have succeeded with their rebuild. And to say that they didn't trade a guy in 2018 is a big deal. I just don't buy it. And I think that the people that want all these guys gone, yeah, I'm for selling everybody you can too. But at the same time, you don't want to give them away, or you don't want to trade them for guys that you can't use. So if they couldn't find what they wanted for Mike Fiers, fine. And it doesn't seem like there was a huge trade market for it. I mean, the A's aren't exactly lush with prospects. I mean, yeah, they have a better farm system, I think, than the Tigers. But, I mean, you're not talking about guys that are looking at, if I want to use the football terminology, 5-star guys. I mean, you're getting minor leaguers or prospects that may or may not pan out. Now, that's almost every trade, but at this point, you're trading a guy that you have team control of for next year for a pair, or maybe one guy in a draft pick that you may not get anything out of. And that's what the trade deadline is. The trade deadline is for teams to improve themselves because they know what they need, and they also know what the prices that they're willing to pay are. And it just doesn't seem like those two things really shook hands here. I don't think that the A's needed a 5th starter that wasn't going to start for them in the playoffs, and I don't think the Tigers are willing to let Mike Fiers go for what amounts to a couple of lottery tickets. And I think that Al Avila last year with the J.D. Martinez trade, I don't want to say he learned his lesson, but I certainly think that he had some caution there because what they traded J.D. Martinez for, and you see what he's doing now with the Boston Red Sox, people look at that and say, boy, you probably could have gotten a lot more. And so, yeah, Mike Fiers isn't J.D. Martinez by any stretch of the imagination, but, I mean, again, you don't want to just give a guy away so that you can say, well, we made these trades. We're getting these guys into the farm system. I mean, they have players that they've tabbed that are going to be watched over the next couple of years. But you're talking, again, about 3 years before they're supposed to be good. And if you want to rush it, trading Mike Fiers for what appears to be a couple of mid-level prospects wasn't going to be the answer.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us to question number 5.
Next question.
Question number 5. Could the Tigers and Athletics have had a deal to trade Mike Fiers? Not that they're willing to, not that we're hoping to, but could they have?
Well, the fact that they're in preparation to get something means that they were interested in doing something at the very least. So that alone tells you what the answer to that question. Yeah, did they have a deal? Maybe, but
if they did, it must have fallen apart, like you pointed out.
If they did, it wasn't really highly advertised because there wasn't a lot of talk of who was coming back. That's what tells me that maybe some people jumped the gun on the whole Mike Fiers is going to Oakland scenario. I mean, not to try to compare this in any real
form, but I mean, you look at the Justin Verlander trade, people thought that was dead. It was reported as such incorrectly, and then he was gone to Houston.
Yeah, people like Chris McCoskey and Lynn Henning thought it was dead, but no.
Yeah. But you look at this and think, well, you usually hear something. Like Mike Fiers going to Oakland, player A and player B to Detroit. That's what's been proposed, or that's what's on the table. I really didn't even hear a lot of what they were prepping to get back in return for him. So it's hard for me to believe that they had a deal signed and sealed, and then the Oakland A's at the last minute said, "No, never mind, we don't want to do that." I think it was more of, we want A and B. Oakland said you're going to get X, Y instead, and they couldn't make those two things work. So, I mean, we'll really never know unless somebody actually says, yes, we did, or no, we didn't. But it doesn't seem to me like they had some deal, some impending deal that they were ready to sign off on, and then Oakland just backed away at the last minute. I feel like this was more of a, hey, they might trade him. This is what they've asked for, and now A's have shut that down.
Yep. So that wraps up our 5-question segment. So to our entire audience, if you want to answer those 5 questions, just replay that segment portion of this episode and answer them the best you can without going out of line. 1 segment to go, but first off, we need to discuss and analyze the Tigers trading. Yeah, they made a trade. They trading center fielder Leonys Martin and a prospect pitcher by the name of Kyle Dowdy to the Cleveland Indians for a prospect shortstop by the name of Willie Castro. Buck, we'll start with you.
I'm going to grade this one a B.
Hold on, let me
really,
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
People didn't think that he was even going to make the team out of camp. People really had a lot of doubt as to his ability and his willingness to actually do what coaches asked him to do, which is, in the leadoff position, try to be on base. He was never really a strong on-base player in his previous stops. He did enough this season that the Indians took a little bit of a flyer on him and brought him into the fold. Like I said before, this was an interdivisional trade, which happens very rarely. In fact, this is the first time in 20 years that the Tigers have traded a player that's on their active 25-man roster to a divisional opponent, and they did that with the Cleveland Indians 20 years ago. So these are not things that happen very often, but at the same time, I think that Al Avila did a nice job of getting something in return for a piece that when they signed him in Leonys Martin, that people really didn't have any strong opinions of him being on the team. So he was able to do enough. He got something, again, a lottery ticket in Willie Castro, and in a position where they're trying to build up because you've got shortstop. I mean, they've really concentrated on that position. And they got another person to put in there and see if they can't make a major league shortstop out of one of these guys. And I think that it was a really nice job by them to just get something at the trade deadline, and they got somebody at a position that really they need, which is shortstop. They don't have a prospect in the system right now that is going to be ready. Just like I said, I mean, this is rebuilding. They're not getting a guy who's going to be their starting shortstop next year, in all probability. They're getting a guy who is tracking along those same lines of 2020, 2021. And I think more and more you're going to start to see that pattern. And as the Tigers continue this rebuild, I think you're going to see more aggressive moves to get guys who are maybe major league ready. You're going to be looking for deals that are going to include guys that, if they feel that they have a need at a certain position that they're getting ready to contend with, they're going to try to fill those more aggressively. So I aggressive at this point. You want to get what you can, and that's what the Tigers did.
Ed, what's your grade on the trade involving Leonys Martin?
Yeah, I'll give it a B- on the grade of, it was a much-ado player given away for a piece that's not ready to contribute right now. If you want to give it a short-term grade, it would be a B-. A long-term grade, I can see that as being a B+, depending on what Castro turns out to be. Because you do need, at least, again, Buck pointed out, this is a position you need to fill out. That way you have at least yourself a potential quality backup in case something were to happen to Jose Iglesias, or you're not able to bring him back in the near future. So they were able to at least get it done from that instance and from that front. This was, again, another example of where the team is at right now, is where they can't be, when you're in a rebuild, not everyone knows you're in a rebuild. Not everyone's going to be giving away the most valuable pieces to you for pennies on the dollar. So the Tigers, they had to take these deals one at a time to get the pieces that they need. Maybe that's why they didn't feel comfortable pulling the trigger on the Oakland deal. So again, this would be an example of they must have really liked what they've seen here. So again, pull off the rare commodity, which is interdivisional trade. So for their sake, they hope this works out long term. But if you ask for my grade for what it could be on this, short term B-, long term potentially B+.
Average range, mid-range B. Just to make it fair, that would be my grade for the Martin trade for Willie Castro. So that's our What's Your Grade segment. So for our audience, if they have a grade for each event, post that in the comment bank in this episode, and please don't go out of line. One cherry to top on that Sunday, Nick Castellanos did not get traded at all, as is the case where he never made the All-Star game nearly because of his defensive metrics. Of course, his defensive WAR is now a negative 1.7. Of course, he made another error on Saturday. He's still garbage defensively in right field. He was garbage defensively at third base. He's still garbage defensively this time in right field. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of other MLB teams willing to develop him, but the Tigers never had a deal with for Nick Castellanos to trade away, and that's or whatever the case may be. But Nick Castellanos was not tradable. Nobody wanted him.
Well, I don't know if nobody wanted him, but I think the thing is with the Tigers is, it goes back to, what are you going to get for him? He's swinging a good bat, but he can't play the field. Well, that really limits who you can trade him to, because that almost takes out almost the entire National League, because there's not a DH spot in the National League. So you're playing a month and a half of games with him in right field or left field or wherever you try to put him, and hoping that he doesn't kill your team on defense. And he's got a good bat this year, but it's just, I think it's kind of comedic that people were talking about his trade value a month ago and how it might not be higher. Well, when he was a prospect, it certainly was higher. It is actually much less now than it was back then. And I think that Nick Castellanos is a case study in don't trade guys just because you don't want them around. He's not going to help you defensively. And there's only so many teams in the American League that were looking for what would have amounted to a part-time DH, right-handed, mind you, and if you had to play him in the field, you could try that out. There's just not a lot of spots for him. So his trade value is low, not only because of his defensive play, but also to the teams that he could potentially go to. And so it's really going to be hard for the Tigers to trade him to get anything substantial in return unless he performs better on defense. And obviously that's not going to happen this year. And I think that next year, I would be not surprised at all if they shift him to first base and try to work out some sort of platoon with a recovering Miguel Cabrera, because I don't think that Miguel Cabrera is going to be able to be traded. I mean, coming off a torn bicep tendon, that's going to be really hard to ship a guy who's advanced in his age and has a very bloated contract. So you got to do something. I wouldn't be very surprised at all if he shifts to first base and does some sort of DH, first base, right field platoon or rotation or whatever you want to call it, and they try to get the most mileage out of him that way. Because, I mean, they try him at third base. He's not a good third baseman. They try him in right field. He's not a great right fielder. Not saying that you can just throw a guy at first base and immediately he doesn't become a defensive liability, because, I mean, Miguel Cabrera has proven that even though when he was in his prime, as good of a hitter as he was still a plus defender. And people usually overlook that fact because of his offensive prowess. Nick Castellanos doesn't have that luxury. Anywhere he goes on the diamond is going to be, you're going to weaken the defense by putting him there. And so it just becomes a matter of where can we put him that he'll hurt us the least and still keep his bat in the lineup. Because, yeah, you can DH him, but you can't really full-time DH him because of the status that your team's in. And you can't really trade him for a whole lot because there aren't teams that are looking for guys that are primarily DHs, because if you're a team that's looking to trade for a DH, you're probably not very good. So it's going to be an ongoing saga, and it's going to be very interesting next season when he comes up, because he's getting to the point where he is going to be in line to be paid as an unrestricted free agent. And the Tigers are going to have to decide at that point if they want to keep him around for the long haul, or if they want to get rid of him and try to make do with what they get back. So I wasn't surprised at all that his name wasn't bandied about. I think it was somewhat ridiculous that his name was being bandied about even before, simply because of what's been going on within the season. So, Castellanos definitely is a player to watch, but it's not going to be because he gets a lot better. It's going to be because if he can at least be serviceable somewhere defensively, that's going to raise his trade value more than anything he does at the plate.
Right.
Agreed.
Yep. So that clears up the trade deadline business, and that is everything we've covered for episode 327. Another almost 90 minutes in the can. Gentlemen, thanks very much. Excellent analysis and points with attention to detail. Let's do it again on episode 328 next week.
Very good. No problem.
Yeah. And before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because we want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is in search for a wider online audience that is fans of sports. So please spread the word about the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts via iTunes, and Spotify, its verified Facebook page, the Michigan Sports Truth podcast, and its Twitter handle at Periscope, and Instagram accounts at Michigan_Truth. I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips, Buck Gino on Twitter at BuckGino3, 3 eyes for Roman numerals, and Ed Smith at EdSmith313. We'll talk to you next week on episode 328. Thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
The Michigan Sports Truth podcast does not represent or defame any of the teams it covers. It only detects, exposes, and reveals honest, actual, and hidden truth, facts, and statistics about them.
Transmission complete.